So here I have a model of a flashlight, and I want to move on to texturing it. One of the common problems I see many of my students running into is that if they start to apply materials here inside of their digital content creation software, be that Max or Maya or Blender, it seems to be making your life easier. You can start to put your colors and materials where you want them here in Blender, but then when you move into Substance Painter, it's made even easier for you because now each part of the mesh has its own material broken out in Painter. But when you then take it into your game engine, you'll have to set up each part of this mesh that you've applied a material to with its own specific shader. This also adds a draw call for every material on the mesh when you start to use the mesh in engine. This results in a lot of performance loss when you don't necessarily need to do that, and you certainly don't want to do that in most cases. There are situations where you will want to have multiple materials per mesh. For example, if you want a lot more detail in one small part of a mesh, or for example on a character's face, it can be worth breaking that out into a separate material and making sure that you make better use of the UV space. A lot of space for the character's face, and then on a second texture you can maybe pack the whole rest of the body in. So let's take a look at 3 different ways of applying textures to this mesh so that we don't end up having to set up a lot of different materials in Unreal or Unity, whatever you want. So the first technique is going to be through just using the built-in paint masks in Substance Painter, and we're going to make use of our UV islands to make painting easier. In this case, I've made sure that the different parts of this model that I want to be different colors each have their own UV island. This isn't essential, but it is going to make this process much faster. So, bringing my mesh into Substance Painter, here's my torch. Make sure that you've disabled auto unwrap since we've sorted out the UVs manually ourselves. We don't want Substance Painter's auto unwrap screwing with our UVs. So here is my torch with only a single material slot on it. So I'm just going to rename this torch or flashlight, whatever you'd like. So how are we going to get different materials applied to different parts of this torch without using multiple materials? So we have 2 main ways of doing this. There is the mesh mask, which is this grayed out little square here on the layer stack, and then there are paint masks. So what a paint mask does is to allow you to show one layer through another, so you can hide parts of one effect. So a simple illustration of that's going to be if I just take the bronze armor effect here. Oh, I didn't bake the model. If I take the bronze armor material here and I want the button to be a different type of material, so let's say I just search for one of the plastics. Here's a nice glossy plastic. How to apply a mask so that this blue glossy plastic is only applied to the button. Find the layer in your layer stack, right click on it and add a black mask. A black mask will hide everything underneath it, and if I start to paint now, I am painting a white layer into the black mask. We can view that by going to our drop down menu here and choosing the mask, and we can visualize the mask that way. I'm just going to get rid of that and press M to go back to the materials view. Painting masks by hand can be done, and in some cases you will have to do it, but it's not the most optimal way to do what we want to do here. I have deliberately modeled this switch so that its UVs are in one big chunk, so we can use this tool over here on the left hand side, the Polygon Fill tool. When you click on the Polygon Fill tool, you will see the wireframe for your mesh become visible. And it has 4 different modes here in the properties panel. There's to fill by triangle. So if I click, you can see I can actually mask out individual triangles of this FBX mesh. You can also fill by quad, which does, as you'd expect, it fills entire quads in one click. This is quite time consuming, but it is very precise, so this is a nice way on relatively low poly meshes to be able to mask out exactly where you want. The third option is the mesh fill mask. This will fill the entire mesh that you select with a mask, and because this torch has been modelled as one single piece, that's not useful for me today. But the fourth option in the Properties panel, the UV chunk fill, will apply a mask based on the UV chunk, so I can select pieces of the UV and it will fill in only that UV chunk. So because I modelled this button as a single UV chunk, I can fill that with a single click, and there we go, there's my torch button filled in. So that's the switch. Let's repeat the process again, this time for this little housing around the bottom of the switch. Let's say I wanted that to be some kind of very worn and damaged steel. So I'm going to apply a new material to the mesh, right click on the steel layer, add a black mask, select the polygon fill tool, paint by UV chunk, and then just click on the part of the model that I want to be filled with this material. And there we go, we now have 3 different kinds of material on our one torch in only a few seconds. Let's do something to the end cap, make it look like it's an unpainted piece of aluminium, something like that. So here's some aluminium, apply that to the entire model, right click on the aluminium layer, add a black mask, and now if I didn't have the UV chunks separated out, so I've deliberately prepared this model to make it easy for me to just fill the individual UV chunks in. Or what if I've made a mistake here and this part of the model at the top I don't want to have painted? Well, now that's where the other different types of fill mode really come into their own. So you can fill by individual triangles, you can fill by quads, and I can just click through this and get exactly the paint only where I need it. Remember, black mask will hide, white mask will show through. And you don't have to just do this in the 3D mode. Sometimes it's a lot easier to do it in the 2D mode. So if I click and drag here, I can fill in large sections of this model very quickly here in the 2D mode. This is because Substance Painter doesn't allow you to check for back faces when you're painting. So if I try and click and drag here, it paints through the entire model, which is just a little bit annoying in situations like this, where what you might want to do is switch the camera to orthogonal view mode, look at this model, end on, and then just click and drag to select only what you want. In this case that's worked mostly, except for here. But yeah, it's not easy always to correct your to correct your paint masks using this tool. Which means the only thing left to do on this model is going to be the lens on the front. So again, I'm going to find a material that I want to use for the lens, just for the sake of this video. We'll put the glass visor material on, I right click, I add a black mask, and then I will go to the polygon fill tool. I'm going to select fill by UV chunk, and I'm going to paint the lens in with the glass. So this is only going to create one set of textures. I will only have to set up one material in Unreal, and in terms of drawing and rendering, this is a relatively efficient model. Let's look at another way of doing the same paint job onto this mesh. What if you just can't use those mesh masks? So this model has been created by having all of the different parts of the mesh broken into individual sub-meshes. They are all individual pieces of a larger mesh which have all been fitted together. Many people, when they first learn to model by kit bashing. So you may have created your model by putting multiple cylinders or multiple cubes together, in which case you might have several pieces which you assemble to create one mesh. This can have its own downsides, but it also can make it easier to texture your model in Substance Painter. Again, this torch only has one material applied to all of the different objects. They all share the same material. That's important because it means they will all share the same UV space. Again, I'm making sure not to auto unwrap. I don't want Substance Painter screwing with my UVs. So This looks like the same torch, but it's actually made out of multiple static meshes all saved into one FBX together. So I'm going to do what you should always do at the start of your project: name the material and then bake the model. And now, very similar to last time, I'm going to start with the main body of the torch and find a material that I want to make this entire torch out of. Let's go with like a scratched steel. Sure, let's use that. Now, how do I apply a material to the lens of this mesh if I don't want to use the black masks and the UV chunk filling technique that we just described earlier? Well, because this is a mesh built out of multiple pieces, we can instead use a mesh mask for this one. So if I grab the same lens material that I used for the other model, and here in the layers window, you'll see this little grey box with nothing in it. If you click on that box, it will open up the geometry mask window here. Now, the geometry mask window allows you to select parts of your mesh and only apply this material to those pieces of geometry. So you can do it down here in the menu. If I only select the light at the front, now there you go, the glasses visor has been applied only to the front of the mesh. But you can also simply click on them and it should highlight the different parts of your mesh here in the geometry mask. If you're intending to use this technique, please name your meshes, otherwise you will end up with cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, cylinder 5, cylinder 6, all the way down here, and it'll just get really annoying for you. But this end, to exit this mode, you have to click back onto one of the actual layers here instead. So if I click on the box next to glass visor, I'm now back in the normal painting mode, and you can see the glass has only been applied to the lens. So let's repeat that again just for the switch, just to show you the process again. If I look for a plastic, here we go, glossy plastic, put that on the model, click on the geometry mask, only enable the piece of geometry that I want the mask to apply to, and then click back on the material to go back to that. And I'm just going to repeat that for the other parts of this mesh. We can also do it just by clicking on the screen here, and back to painting mode. And then on the very back of this model, I'm going to do the same thing again, grab some aluminium, add a mesh mask, and have it only apply to the end cap here. Back to painting mode, and there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different materials applied to the torch's textures in a single texture pack. So this will be one shader in Unreal. And we can see on the UVs that it's broken up the color and applied everything only to the parts of the mesh that we want it applied to. So that's the geometry mask, using the actual mesh itself as a mask. Right, the last way that we can make our life easier when texturing is the most complicated but arguably the most powerful way to mask off your model. So this model here is the torch with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different materials assigned to it. It's got far too many materials for a small prop like this. This would be extremely inefficient. The UV unwrap for it is really bad. They're stacked on top of each other. They're all different texture sizes. This is not an ideal way to create a game-ready prop at all. If I put this model into Substance Painter, we'll see what that looks like with loads of different materials. So this is a good example of something I see a lot of new modelers doing, is when they've created a model, they've applied materials to all of the different parts of the model, and they end up with loads of different materials here in Substance Painter, which is also going to end up with them having loads of materials to set up in Unreal. This is very inefficient, it's extremely time consuming, and the only thing it does in your favor is make it easy to only put the textures where you want them. If I select the button texture here and I drag a material onto select the button and drag a material onto the button, it will only apply the material to that one layer. So this seems to new modelers to be quite a quick and easy way to start texturing your model. It turns Substance Painter into a very drag and drop affair, but it will create a lot of problems for you further down the line. So this, for a small prop like this, what you'd really be hoping for, you can see how long this is also taking to bake with multiple materials on a small prop like this. This should be a much faster bake. And yes, it works. You can do this, and if you only need to create a render for your 3D models, then sure, go ahead and use as many materials as you want. But if you need to use this in a game engine, if you need this to be a performant, game-ready asset, you want to use the minimum number of materials possible to give you the result that you need. But applying all of your materials in your digital content creation software can be used in Substance Painter to create an ID mask, a quick tool that will allow you to apply materials only where you want them on the mesh without having to use a paint mask or a geometry mask like we saw earlier. It's a couple of steps to set up though. So what you will need is 2 meshes. Here is my torch with only one material, well, no materials applied to it, and the entire model has been unwrapped onto one UV sheet. This is how I want it to actually be used in the game. This is probably what an asset like this should be set up like. But I also have a second identical torch, which I have applied lots of materials to all the different parts of it. And in Substance Painter, you can use a detailed higher poly version of a model to project details onto a lower one. In this case, I'm going to take the material colors from the mesh I don't want to use and use them as a mask to create zones of color on the mesh which only has one material. I'll show you how that works on it. So this is the game ready asset. This is the one with a single material. I don't want to do anything else to this asset. Here in the Baker, before we start painting, we're going to bring in that torch with all of the different colors and materials applied to it and use it as a high poly parameter mesh. So if you click this tiny little button, why this button's so small? No idea. Click this button here and find your mesh with all of the colors and materials applied to it, and make sure that the ID mask section of your mesh parameters is set to material color, and then we can generate an ID mask based on the colors in this already material textured mesh, which should look something like this. So what I'm previewing here is an ID mask. This is a texture which has captured all of the material colors from the high poly mesh, the one we already applied the materials to, and has applied them to our low poly mesh with only one material. I'll do a different video on creating ID masks because this process currently doesn't work from 3ds Max. The material colors are not detected by Substance Painter for some reason, but it does work in Blender. And I assume it works in Maya. I haven't been able to test that. If you know, please let me know in the comments. I'm going to start by applying a base metal to the entire body of the torch here. So if I grab this cobalt, and now just like I've done before, I want to apply a plastic to the switch here on top. So I search for a plastic, find my, here we go, glossy blue plastic and drag it on. And now when it comes to masking, when we right click to add our mask or use the mask drop down button here, instead of adding a black mask, choose the 4th option down, add mask with color selection. The color selection will automatically locate the ID mask which we just baked and generated, and then all you have to do is choose pick color from the menu here on the side, and when you click on that it will switch the view over to the ID mask. And you can see those colors from the materials that we set up in our digital content creation software are here in Substance Painter ready to be used as a mask. So if I click red now, it only puts the glossy plastic onto the red mask sections of the mesh. If I grab this orange glossy plastic, put that in, right click, add mask with color selection, pick color and choose this gray here, well now we've got a little base plate underneath our switch. At the end of this, just like I've done 3 times now already, I want to grab this aluminium, put it on my torch, right click, add mask with color selection, pick color, and grab that end piece on the back of the torch. And then let's do the same thing just with the glass visor for simplicity. Right click, add mask with color selection, and choose the yellow at the front. So again, this only has one material, and we're able to very quickly apply the different layers of material to our one texture set that this mesh needs using the ID mask. So, 3 different ways of setting up your meshes and texturing them so that you only end up with the minimum number of material sets required. It's not always the case. Like I said, emissive materials you may want to break into a separate material if you want to animate them. Transparent components on your mesh you will probably want as a separate material, particularly in Unreal. It doesn't like using transparency volumes with non-transparent sections to them. And if you simply need a higher texture resolution in a different part of your mesh, for example a name badge, a computer monitor, a character's face, these are all reasons to use a different material and then utilize the new UV space to give yourself more texture space to work.